This week on the Hollywood in Toto podcast, we break down the biggest meltdown from this week's Oscar nominations, and we talk with Alan Ng, the editor of FilmThreat.com and the mind behind the fascinating D-Files. Yeah, the D stands for Disney, and there is a lot of corruption going on behind the scenes. We'll give you a sneak peek coming soon.
Welcome to the Hollywood in Toto podcast. Entertainment news and reviews without the woke Hollywood narrative. Free speech, free expression. Now that's entertainment. And here's your host, award-winning film critic, Christian Toto.
Before we start, I'd love it if you subscribe to the Hollywood in Toto podcast. We've got new episodes each Wednesday, plus more and more bonus episodes coming in soon. The Oscars are dead. The Oscars are dead. Well, long live the Oscars. Yeah, the Oscars have taken some body blows in recent years, mostly self-inflicted. But we are still talking about them all these years later, so you got to give them cut some slack. Here I am talking about it right now for sure. But what did we learn this week from the annual Oscar nominations? Well, for starters, I think Oppenheimer's going to have a pretty good night come March 10th. The film got 13 nominations. That is huge, including the biggies, Best Picture and Best Director. Now, I think there's zero chance that Christopher Nolan's not going to go home empty-handed on March 10th. He is a great director. He's been doing it for years now. He is celebrated. He is beloved within the industry. He brought people out to see a movie like Oppenheimer, which was 3 hours long, which was historical in nature, which didn't have any big stars in major roles. Listen, no offense to Cillian Murphy. He's a great actor, but he is not a draw at the box office. And yet it made a ton of money. Christopher Nolan is just an exception to every rule in Hollywood, and may he make movies in perpetuity. But Team Barbie? Well, that's another story. Listen, the movie got a lot of nominations, including Best Picture. Can you believe that? Barbie as Best Picture? What an absolute joke. But it didn't earn the director, Greta Gerwig, a nomination for her work on the film. And of course, Margot Robbie, so charming as Barbie, she didn't get a Best Actress nomination either. The horror. It took like a few hours before the press was in full frenzy mode. How dare the voters choose other talent over Gerwig and Robbie? This is the patriarchy in action. Hey, they've been nominated for Oscars before. They'll be nominated for Oscars again. They're young. They're talented. They've got long careers ahead of them. You can't win every time. Let's see how long this obnoxious news cycle lasts. It could be more than a few days. But listen, it's the same old story. Instead of Oscars so white, it's Oscars so patriarchal. We'll workshop that hashtag. But it's exhausting. The site Deadline.com, which is as far left as most of them, did this whole story just basically counting the people of color, gay and lesbian actors, indigenous people. Did they get nominated? Was it enough this time? It seems like it might have been, even though some films with people of color were ignored, like Origin and The Color Purple, for the most part. I mean, this is just an exhausting conversation. But here's the bottom line for Barbie. It got all the money. It got all the attention. It made everyone dress up in pink. I think I might be the only one who didn't, but most people did dress up in pink to see it. It scored $1 billion. That's a B, not an M. $1 billion at the box office. And you know what? It made a lot of people happy. Now, that didn't include me. I had some problems with the film. I thought it started strong. It just lost its mojo midway through. But I love seeing audiences happy. That's what movies are all about. Have a great time. Escape the world. That's it. That's what this is. That's ball game, essentially. And that's what happened with Barbie. People came to the theaters, maybe some who weren't going to theaters, and they enjoyed the experience. It became an event. Isn't that enough? I think it's pretty good. Even take away all the money. They made Barbie a cultural moment. And the fact that it's not going to get all the Oscars, I don't give a damn. I really don't. So let's hope this outrage cycle for Barbie is short-lived, because you know what? The movie was more than enough for Hollywood. Sorry, I couldn't resist. All right, this is the movie trivia question of the week. What superstar, and I don't use that term loosely, was gonna play the main character in Beverly Hills Cop before someone named Eddie Murphy stepped in and made it a classic? The answer? That's the end of the show. The reporters covering Hollywood these days, by and large, well, they stink. Sorry, not sorry. Why do I say that? It's kind of cold. Well, they ignore stories that don't fit the narratives they want to promote. They're hopelessly biased to the left, much like the mainstream news media. And they refuse, this drives me crazy, they refuse to defend free speech. Oh, and by the way, some of them had an inkling about Harvey Weinstein, and they let it slide too. That leaves a massive opening for independent journalists, I mean, it's what I do, to cover what isn't being covered in Hollywood. And that's where Alan Ng comes in. Alan's the editor-in-chief of FilmThreat.com. It's an indie website that goes back to the 1980s. Yeah, it's old school. It's been around for a long time. Still has that same pugnacious spirit. Now, Alan and Film Threat founder Chris Gore are doing the work that so many Hollywood journalists just won't do these days. And I think a great example of this is the D-Files. It's an ongoing series at FilmThreat.com and also on the podcast that looks at the dysfunction behind the scenes at the Mouse House. Yeah, that's Disney. I mean, we're talking woke mania to DEI run wild. There's a reason why the Disney product the last few years has been substandard. Listen, we used to love Disney. We look forward to Disney films. Not anymore. They're getting to the reason why. It is fascinating. And also, there's the great Film Threat podcast. Again, it covers Hollywood in a way that is fresh, exciting, without a filter. Now, Alan loves movies, but he also knows when you have to apply some tough love to the industry. Now, Alan's a film critic, he's a comedian, but most of all, he's just smart about what's going on behind the scenes in Hollywood and what makes a great motion picture. So naturally, I couldn't wait to have him on the show. Please enjoy my conversation with Alan Ng. Alan, thanks for joining the show. You know, I often get asked, how did you get into reviewing movies? It's such an odd business. It's a great gig to have, obviously, but there's not a, you go to school, you become a film critic. It doesn't work like that. Just real briefly, tell me how you got involved with Film Threat and or got into this business. It's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, well, I'll give you a brief explanation of a very long story. You know, I mean, quite frankly, always loved movies. I was always a big fan of Disney movies as a kid. And then I remember when Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel, they were on PBS, and I watched them religiously. And just that kind of, you know, at that young age inspired me to become a film critic. But then life got in the way, had to pay for bills and things like that. And then basically when the housing crash happened in 2008, my life got turned upside down. And rather than go back in the office, it became about, hey, let's see if we could pursue this passion of not just film criticism, but talking about films.
Yeah.
Just started blogging. And then from there, you know, I met up with Chris Gore at a Futurama event for their mobile video game. And he said, yeah, just send me some samples and we'll see how it goes. And I did, got on, quickly proved that I knew what I was doing. I knew how to run a website. And from there, he brought me on as managing editor and now editor-in-chief.
I love that story. By the way, I think Siskel and Ebert were the gateway drug for a lot of people like you and I. We watched those shows and just said, I want to be that. I want to do that. I want to argue with my friend about movies because it seems so cool.
I mean, ultimately, that's it. It's the fun of just standing by the water cooler and talking about movies and, you know, something stupid like that, and just being able to bond with people. Even when you disagree, it was fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think their epic battles were probably the best part of the show.
Yeah.
You know, I think I'm fairly new to Film Threat, maybe 5 or 6 years now, and I saw a rough cut of a documentary about the whole magazine and everything, and there's such a rebellious streak built into its DNA, which is wonderful. But being a rebel today, it feels different than it was in the past. How would you describe Film Threat in 2024? What's the elevator pitch there? Because I mean, I can see it, I can feel it, I can sense it when I listen to you guys talk and I read the website. But you're in the belly of the beast. What is Film Threat for the uninitiated?
Yeah, well, Film Threat is basically, we're an indie film publication. Started in 1985. Chris Gore, the publisher, he began it just out of high school. and it was is essentially a fanzine, and it was basically and weirdly enough, the attitude of Film Threat hasn't changed in the sense of, the big Hollywood studios are just have never really reflected us as a people, as fans of movies.
Mhm.
And the magazine was there to kind of take swipes and take digs at the Hollywood system. We were even early on when it came to stories of the casting couch, decades before the Me Too movement and Harvey Weinstein. Um, and today, when I first came on board with Film Threat in 2017, our prime focus was independent films. And today, even my mantra this year is basically Hollywood's not the dream anymore.
Mhm.
If you're a filmmaker out there and you want to tell your stories and you want to direct films, write films, be an actor, um, you don't necessarily want to go the Hollywood system. In fact, the tools are available to you now as a filmmaker to make your movie. And now, if there's enough indie filmmakers out there, we can all band together and figure out, how do we distribute our films? How do we get people to see it? Because, quite frankly, if you go into the Hollywood system, you're not telling your stories anymore. You're
Yeah.
telling their story. And you're
I
telling
mean,
it the way they want it.
and that's an exciting thing. I mean, the technology, the barriers have fallen by
Mhm.
the wayside. And listen, it's never easy. I've talked to indie filmmakers over the years, even people with fairly big names, or they had cast members that were very recognizable, the Bill Murrays of the world, and they struggled to make the movie. So I think at any point, it's a burden, it's a struggle, it's an uphill battle. But I think
Absolutely.
the everyman now can do it in a way that was never possible. If someone listened to the Film Threat podcast for the first time, or they were just getting accustomed to it, they might think it's a conservative show in some regards. It's not the case. It's not political at all. But why do you think that the whole notion of a color-free society, a frustration with checking boxes, that's a political issue, it feels like right now?
Yeah.
How would you react to that?
Yeah. I mean, I think to answer that question and the one before it, you know, before Film Threat was always kind of going up against big Hollywood. Now I feel like we're going up against this culture war that's going on,
Mhm.
and race has something to do with it, or race has a lot to do with it. And we were just talking about it today, but if when I think about my life as a Chinese American, lived all my life in California in the U.S. Um, someone recently said that the barriers of race and equality are almost completely down, and the fact that we're almost there at the finish line when it comes to equality. And when I look at what my life was in the 80s, and trying to break into the business, any business, compared to now, I have to agree with that. It is so much easier now to get for a person of color like myself to get a job in the fields that I wish I had than it was when it was the 80s. And for some reason, and I have conspiracy theories about it, but this issue of race is not one that people want to solve anymore. It feels like that there's a system out there that wants to keep us constantly at odds with each other, which is ironically the whole plot behind Flash Gordon, Ming the Merciless, keeping all the tribes at war with each other. And I feel like that seems to be what's going on in the culture now. Is they have to constantly keep us at war with one another.
That's fascinating. I think we won't go there, but there's an offshoot of how the media treats these issues, and the pundits and the news and everything like that. It's frustrating as well. And I think one of the many reasons why I love the work that you and Chris Cord do is that you tackle that. You have these honest conversations. You're not afraid of sharing some points of view, which can be uncomfortable or that can be provocative. And I think that really does matter. Now, very recently, you've been doing something, which I love the name, by the way, the D-Files, looking at Disney, what's going on behind the scenes. Ironically, I got someone to speak to me off the record for my book, Virtue Bombs, on this subject. Things have gotten exponentially more dramatic behind the scenes since then, and you're getting a lot of people talking.
Yes.
Break that down for us briefly, and also just the frustration that must have led people to say, I need to get the story out. I'm going to trust Alan and Chris to do it, but just give us some more about this.
Yeah. Well, the brief history is when the movie Wish came out, I was at a an LA screening featuring the director and the stars. And when I watched Wish, I was thinking to myself throughout the entire film was, this is not a Disney movie. This the way it looks. I'm not even talking about the story or the
Mhm.
politics of it. It just doesn't look like a Disney movie from an artistic standpoint. And when I've been a Disney fan for all my life. I own a copy of Illusions of Life, and so I know, and I've seen all the documentaries. I know the explanations of how Walt Disney did animation. And when I saw Wish, it was almost as if they had cast aside Walt's textbook and his legacy for, ironically, the movie that represents the 100 years of the Walt Disney Company. And so I did a review on our Film Threat livecast on YouTube, and I just went through the trailer and just went through screen by screen why everything on the screen looks boring, why it violated everything that was being taught to animators from Walt himself and throughout the decades, and how this was the worst animated movie in the company's history. And so I went on this kind of rant, and I walked away thinking, was I too harsh, or maybe I'm crazy? Maybe did I see things I didn't see, or was I seeing things that weren't there? And then we started getting emails. All started. Please keep this anonymous, and they began to explain what was going on at Disney Animation, and they were essentially saying everything you said was right, and that things are not going well at Disney Animation, and stories started to leak, or stories started to come to us, and we did a follow up. And from that follow up, just it began to open the floodgates as to the toxic environment that Disney had become. And the reason I think this series is so important to me, at least, is for a lot of us who love Disney, who wanted to go into the arts and entertainment. Working for the Walt Disney Company was the dream. If you were an artist, you wanted to be a Walt Disney animator. You wanted to work on a Walt Disney classic. And right now, that dream is dead. So much so that it's not a dream anymore. No one cares to work at Walt Disney anymore. The accolades you would get for having been part of a Walt Disney production is gone. And I'll say this: the one thing I learned is that it's not just the Walt Disney Company, but it's the entire animation industry.
Hmm.
And that right there is the heartbreaker, because it's killing a lot of dreams,
Yeah.
and it's all because of politics.
And it's funny because I think there are opportunities for animators to go different routes. They could go, I
Mhm.
guess they could make an independent film. They can work for some of the upstart companies that are rising up right now. That's always a possibility, but it's frustrating. Is the problem that we're talking about, this sort of forced diversity at all costs, is there a reason? Is it worse in animation as opposed to live action, or is it just? I'm kind of curious why it's been such
Yeah.
a hotbed there. It
Yeah,
doesn't.
well, I mean, the reason why we're focusing on Disney animation is because that was kind of the genesis of
Mhm.
the discussion.
Sure, sure.
This is where it all started. But from what I'm hearing, it's an industry-wide problem. We just published an article from a WGA writer, a white male writer who can't find work anymore, and because they won't hire white guys anymore, and it's not like they're trying to hide it either. We can't use you anymore. I'm, look, having again grown up Asian in America, uh, that sounds like racism to me.
Yeah, yeah, it's frustrating. Actually, one of our previous guests, Tyler Fisher, very funny comedian, he is straight and he is white. Actually, his father's gay, for whatever that's worth. But he has written about, and I believe he's suing his former representative because they said to him basically, "You're a white male. I can't help you. I can't get you work. I can't work with
Mhm.
you." And he didn't react kindly to it, which I don't blame him. So it is fascinating. In my perfect world, which I thought would be everyone's perfect world, the barriers for people of color would eventually chip away and fall. so that if you're a Jordan Peele and you happen to be black, but you're a very talented filmmaker, you would get your opportunity. And then when you had that success, you became part of the system. You could tell stories. I mean, that would, to me, that's the dream, but it feels like we're going a different direction.
Look, we could agree or disagree on affirmative action, but that was the heart, at least in the beginning, when ironically President Nixon brought it into play. That was the idea: is if you have two equally qualified people, one is white and one is black, why not take the risk on the black candidate? And that was the idea, is to say, hey, of the population there, let's work for some kind of equality here. But what we found with the D-Files was it was more than that. It was not about making necessarily the pool of animators 50-50 men, women, but it was the kind of women they wanted. It was basically what we discovered was an organization coming in and basically saying, here's some of our approved women for you to hire. And they would come in and they would form kind of a creative block, a creative army, so to speak. And by being that solid unit, you can now dictate how things are run, storyline. You can influence storyline very, very forcefully. And then you can also quiet your critics by, if you disagree with them, we'll throw an is their way and shut them up.
Yeah. It's funny. You mentioned in one of your previous reports that there were women behind the scenes who were women. You think they'd be part of this revolution, but they didn't have the same groupthink. If they weren't as activist as their fellow female animators, then they'd get in trouble. And by the way, I've been arguing about this for a while now, and it took me a while to kind of unlock it. I think it's pretty fair, pretty accurate. When we talk about what is woke, because you can look at woke and say, oh, there's a lot of good things built into it. It has good intentions. It's meant to be a more equitable society. And it's hard to critique any of that. But what woke really is about power and control. And you see it in political spaces for sure. But what you're describing is another power play behind the scenes, where it isn't about getting women on board. It's about getting certain women with certain ideas and certain philosophies on board, so that the woman who may be different doesn't get involved in that push. I mean, that's fascinating to me.
Yeah. I mean, it was revealed to us that at Walt Disney, there are women, basically women training meetings or women talk sessions where they would basically network, encourage one another, and give strategies of how to be in more leadership positions. And it, let's just say, if we take it a step further, these are the times in which you strategize. You strategize of how you're going to go into that next creative meeting about the upcoming film that you're working on, and you're and you sit around together. You start criticizing. Well, should a woman really do that? Should a man really do that? And then you come in as that block, and in a way that it becomes, you become a bully.
Yeah,
and that allows other people to, I'll say this, having been in creative positions my whole life, you have to be able to think freely. And the moment that you start censoring yourself, or the moment that people start censoring you and start making you feel bad for the way you think, that's when creativity dies. And that's when you start getting the products that Disney is pushing out right now.
And that's the ultimate answer here, or the ultimate result, is that if all this chaos was going on behind the scenes, but Disney was producing one instant classic after another, it would be hard to dive into this and to be outraged by it. I mean, it would certainly be outrageous in a certain extent, but if the product coming off the assembly line was, Lion King 2, or just, movies that were of that caliber, it would be a more difficult conversation. But everything you're talking about makes inferior stories. And that's what's so disappointing at Disney. And I think I wasn't as hard on Wish as you were. And I'm a recovering art major. And when I think about what Disney animation is, there's a twinkle to it. I'll put it as crudely as possible. There's a way that the bodies move, the way that the characters perform, the way that they carry out their comic beats, that is so special and so magical. And I've interviewed some animators over the years from Disney, and they've shared some of the stories and the hard work they do and the research. It's exhausting. And when you think about what you see on screen with Wish, it just isn't there. So it is fascinating. I'm glad you said it.
Well, let me tell you, the Disney animators you talked to a while ago about that, they are probably not working there
They're
anymore.
probably gone. Yeah. And that was only like
Yeah.
8 or 9 years ago too. So
Yeah, exactly.
not so long ago.
I mean, that's the thing is they brought in a new army of women, and who had no experience in animation, and or had very little experience in animation. I could tell you a lot of them came off Tumblr, you know, and and they were there, and you had to listen to them. And I think a lot of the veteran animators and veteran writers, they saw the writing on the wall,
Yeah.
and whether they were forced out because of something accidental they may have said, or they realized that their career was in jeopardy, they need to move on to better pastures.
Yeah.
I think that happened.
Given the tenor of the times, what you and Chris are doing at Film Threat, I think it's important. I think it's obviously important. Are you facing any collective backlash in any way professionally for what you're doing? You are sticking a finger in the eye of the industry in certain interesting ways. Have you had any blowback or feedback or opportunities that didn't happen because of that? And sometimes that can be hard to tell.
Yeah.
But I'm just kind of curious,
Well,
what's that like?
Yeah, well, thankfully, no.
Good.
We've not gotten any other than internet trolls. You know, the thing is that I think what we're doing right, and I'll refer to the first article where we talked about the downfall of John Lasseter, and how his firing started this whole change at Disney. The thing that I think benefited us was that we were fair. You know, I know that going into that story, I was fully prepared to exonerate John Lasseter for every crime he was accused of. And as I began doing research, as people reached out to me, and as I've been doing a couple of interviews with people, you realize that he was not a perfect person. He had his own personal demons, and had he had control of those demons, we would be having a different story. He would most likely still be there.
Yeah.
And that's and the thing that people brought out after that article came out was the fact that you were fair. You pointed out his true demons. At the same time, you pointed out how those demons were used against him as a weapon to get him out of the company.
Interesting. Yeah. So that just being fair is the shield that you need to kind of weather this kind of a storm.
Because that's what a lot of, not to get politics too far into this, but the things I see from the left and the right, from the extremes, is that they have a narrative that they have to hold to.
Yeah.
And the truth is brought up, they still won't change that narrative. And that's ultimately what I had to do when it came to researching John Lasseter.
A lot of the information that you are unveiling, that you're sharing with the world, is sober, it's smart, it's thoughtful, and you don't have to agree with it, but it should be part of this bigger cultural debate. And yet the people who are reaching out to you, they don't want their names out there. They know there's going to be repercussions, and I don't blame them at all. I mean, these are their livelihoods at stake. How do we get to the point where they can speak up, speak fairly, be honest, and hopefully spark enough dialogue where change may happen, where it can be an opportunity and a possibility? How do we get to that point? Because I hate the fact that, listen, I love the fact that you're airing these views, that you're getting these tips, but it should be with names attached. It should be with people who aren't afraid of their livelihoods going away for sharing an opinion. How do we get to that point? Because that seems like what we need.
Right. Well, I think, it's a tricky question. Because you would think, someone, this is the classic Disney story. So someone stands forward, says, this is what's happening, and then all is good. But the reality is when someone steps forward, says something's wrong, they get eviscerated on social media. They get fired. They're left out alone by themselves, and there's no one there to offer them jobs, and their literal families are at risk at this point.
Yeah.
So, can now my kids go to college? Can I feed my kids? The way it ends is someone at the top saying, hey, I say this across the board. Someone at the top has to admit that something wrong is going on. Lay it out. This is what's been happening, and then say, this is how we're going to fix it.
Yeah.
And until someone at the top does that, because then the people who have been victims of these policies can now rally together and say, yeah, I've been a victim of that. And this is what we're going to do. And then someone at the top does that, because then the people who have been victims of these policies can now rally together and say, yeah, I've been a victim of that. And this is what we're going to do. And then someone at the top does that, because then the people who have been victims of these policies can now rally together and say, yeah, I've been a victim of that. And I'm glad the company now is standing behind me and my story.
Yeah. I mean, even
Like,
just to say, hey, I know Jane Smith. She's a great employee. She's got some opinions. They're challenging, but I don't want anything to happen to her. She should, I hope she has a long career at Disney or wherever the heck she can be. And then maybe, move forward to where someone does have your back in that way. Um, I think what you and Chris do in the show is important. And I also think you explore areas that maybe aren't being fully examined as of yet. Maybe they will be soon. But is there anything out there right now in the culture from an industry point of view that you're just seeing, just getting a feel for, just sensing that something's bubbling up that you could share a little bit about?
oh gosh, not anything specific,
Uh,
just feelings that when it's just I hear news stories here and there of just people kind of returning to common sense.
yeah.
I think recently, I think it was the CEO of JP Morgan Chase saying something political about, maybe Trump wasn't completely wrong. Um,
Get
and
him.
yeah, and you see these glimpses of people speaking not just the truth, but what was once considered common sense
Yeah.
about gender roles, about the traditional family, about the effects the fall of the family has had. And it's you know a lot of the discussion has been around what happened to Walt Disney, because he's certainly not a part of the Walt Disney Company anymore.
Yeah. That's right.
In fact, he's disappeared. He's been canceled. Uh, and I heard a story of a very high-ranking Disney official who, when told basically, hey, but I think Walt had this concern when it came to guests. The response from that high-ranking official was F Walt.
Oh my gosh. Well, it doesn't get much
Yeah.
more clear
And
than
one day
that.
I'll reveal who that official was.
Gotcha. Well, Alan, before we let you go, I do want to end on a more positive note. We can be
Yeah.
pretty rough on Hollywood. We're beating it up a lot, and I think it's well deserved. But what has you excited about 2024 when you look at pop culture, either specific titles, specific themes, something kind of coming around the bend, anything that you're saying, oh, I know, listen, we have our problems with Hollywood, but I think this is going to be a bright spot.
Yeah. I mean, fortunately, Hollywood's not going to be producing much this year.
That's a
But
glass
there
is half
have
full.
Yeah, I mean there have been bright spots. I mean, I'll be honest. This movie has been hiding for a very long time, but it's in the awards talk. But American Fiction
Mhm.
is my favorite movie from last year, and it deals with the writer director Court Jefferson. He wrote the play based on the book Erasure by Everett Percival.
Mhm.
And his basic thesis was the Black experience in America. It ranges from slavery to the presidency, and there's millions, if there's millions of stories in between, and that his whole purpose of American Fiction was to tell one of those stories in
Yeah.
between.
Huh.
And so I have to feel that you know we're moving in the right direction, but there's certainly a lot of roadblocks in the way, and I think 2024 is going to be a very weird year to see where we're going.
Yeah.
We'll either be very happy by the end of the year or very sad by the end of
That's
the
right.
year.
And one last thought about American Fiction. The fact that the industry itself has been so welcoming to it, not just the film, but its message, its humor, its satire, I think that's a sign of hope as well. So
Yeah.
but we shall see.
Although I always say the reason for that is within the movie.
That's true. That's true. Well, Alan, thank you for sharing your time with us. I know you're really
you're
busy
welcome.
these days, but you're doing a lot of great stuff at Film Threat. And of course, watch the Film Threat podcast. You can find it on YouTube or go old school. Check out your favorite podcast provider. I confess I do it that way sometimes as well. But and also check out his great investigative work at filmthreat.com, like the D-Files. But also there's so many independent film reviews. They cover the industry better than just about anyone. Small films, bigger films, films you've never heard of, but you maybe want to. They're all there. Check them out. Alan, keep up the great work and keep those
Thank you,
scoops
Christian.
coming. They do matter.
Oh yeah, no, a pleasure to be here, and big admirer of your career.
Thanks. That makes one of us. Thanks. Before we wrap up, got to find out the answer to that trivia question. Which superstar was cast originally to play Axel Foley in Beverly Hills Cop? Believe it or not, it was the Italian stallion, Sylvester Stallone. Now, the first script for the film had a more dark, a more ominous tone to it. It wasn't a comedy, so there had to be significant rewrites to get it applicable and make it perfect for the star who did take over for Stallone. Of course, that's Eddie Murphy. The rest is box office history, and as much as I love Sly, he is the best, I am so glad he stepped aside and let Eddie take over. Well, that's it for the show this week. Thank you, of course, to Radio America for having me as part of their great podcast lineup. And while I have your ear, I really want you to drop by HollywoodInToto.com. It's updated every day. Got news, reviews, commentary. This is its 10-year anniversary. Please, no cards, no presents. Just enjoy the site. And, of course, like this podcast, it is the right take on entertainment. I'll see you next time.